Well, it is my distinct pleasure to have the chance to interview Daryl, who is a client of our firm for, 10 years?
Many years.
I've lost track. But I had a chance to meet Daryl first when, this is a few weeks ago, where our firm was doing a client testimonial video. And I was in the back room watching 10 of our clients share their stories, and they had a set of questions that they were responding to. And I'm in the back room and I'm listening to Daryl's story, and I was just blown away. I said, "This is perfect." And it was just at that time where one of our main speakers, who was going to be in this segment, had to bail out. And it was right after he spoke, I said, "Daryl, would you mind taking some time, spending time with a number of other CEOs of Florida's businesses?" He said, "Sure, give me the questions." So I asked our group of advisors to come up with a bunch of questions, which we're going to ask you.
Very
and this is going to be a fun experience. Feel free to ask your own, but I'm going to start us off with some of the prepared questions, if you will. All right. So start from the beginning. Okay. Tell me everything. Okay. Okay. Where you started right out of school and how you moved into the various ventures and then out, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. Let me just start by saying that Valintry Services, my current organization, we provide IT planning. A lot of you use financial planners. We do technology planning for companies. And so we're able to go in and do an assessment, and we're able to come in and not only provide an assessment with a plan, but also the actual resources to fill and make that plan a reality. The other half of what we do is we provide staffing services and staff augmentation services for technology as well as CPA and finance staff. And we provide these services throughout the country. Going back early in my career, I have an accounting background. I am not a CPA, but was interested in accounting and became very interested in the fact that in looking at the tax code, those of us that work for W-2 organizations as a W-2 employee, we give away a lot of our taxes to the government, and that's the way the system works. But what I was amazed by was how much the tax system actually supports entrepreneurs. I went from there to a healthcare company, spent 10 years. It was a publicly traded company, became an officer in that company, managed 30 or 40 post-acute care buildings throughout the central part of the United States. Had an excellent career with them, became very interested in rehabilitation, specifically physical therapist, occupational therapist, and speech-language pathologist. And those of you that know anything about those professions, they are very, very difficult to recruit and to find. The demand for them exceeds the supply in a major way, but they do amazing things with patients. So I left the first company, which was ManorCare HCR, and went on to another company called NovaCare, and at the time we were the largest employer of physical therapists, occupational therapists, and speech-language pathologists in the country. The interesting thing about that business was on any given day there were thousands of open positions that I couldn't fill. And so it was a very unique opportunity, and generally my biggest customer complaint was, "I want more of your services, but just can't get them." So some very unique customer service challenges to deal with. In 1999, the Medicare system blew up, and I left healthcare for the first time and went into, became the president of the largest private elementary and preschool company in the United States. My largest shareholder was Lowell and Michael Milken at that time. I felt like working with educators was working very similarly with clinical people. None of those people pick their professions to support a publicly traded company and profit. So there's always a really delicate balance in terms of motivating them and making sure that the company was values-based and focused on the right things. Worked with that education company for 3 years, and Sarbanes-Oxley was coming in. I had had my fill of publicly traded companies, shareholder meetings, stockholder meetings, and said, my whole dream going back to understanding that tax code was to become an entrepreneur. And so in 2001, my wife and I packed up from the Philadelphia suburbs. We had lived in numerous places throughout the country, moved to Orlando and started our first travel staffing company for physical therapists, occupational therapists, and speech-language pathologists. And so from there, we built that company up over a 6-year period, but most importantly, in 2001, and I didn't even know he was going to be here today, but I happen to have, I'm a faith-based person, and I think it was a God thing that I ended up in the office of Bernie Pekarsky in 2001, ready to start my first business. And I didn't understand search engine optimization. I understood recruiting. I understood what it was like to build a recruiting organization, but he educated me to search engine optimization and the fact that at that time, anybody could have a website, but if you have a website and nobody can find you, it's not going to do any good. And so we started a very long-term relationship, and we continue to be good friends to this day. And we successfully built a 100% internet-based staffing company in 2001. And the criteria was for any vendor that we worked with is they had to be able to support us on the web. And the reason was we were a virtual organization. The first 3 years, we all worked from our homes. Large healthcare companies used to send me checks to my personal mailbox. They didn't know that Oakmont Terrace was actually my home. But that worked well for 3 years, and then we moved into offices, continued to expand, and were approached by a buyer in 2006. The company wasn't for sale. We had not built it to the size we wanted to, and they kind of wouldn't go away. So finally I said, I don't know what it's worth. And so we actually paid a lot of money to actually shop the company. We met with multiple prospective buyers, from private equity groups to strategic buyers, very educational experience, and interestingly enough, ended up going full circle back to the original company that was a strategic buyer that wanted to buy us. And the key is they were a strategic buyer. The others were investors. And so we actually negotiated a deal. They felt that deal was the current multiple at that time was around a 6x multiple. After a 3-year earnout, the deal ended up being about a 14x multiple. Sometimes the stars, the moon, and the sky align. So it was very successful, and they did what they actually promised, which is very rare for companies to do. And we actually stayed with them through the 3-year earnout, and actually 3 years beyond that, till 2013. We had been looking and monitoring what was happening in the technology space. We were also a technology-based company, and our operating systems were a key part of our assets. And so that's what led to our acquisition, and that led us into expanding into technology consulting, linking up with the CIO from back at NovaCare, who was out of Johnson & Johnson, and then forming our company today that provides these two services, and that is the IT strategic planning and assessment in terms of solutions, and then the other half of our organization, which is focused on headhunting, specific recruiting for IT, accounting, and finance.
Absolutely fantastic. So with Valintry now, all right, how did you originally start to develop sales? You know, who'd you talk to first? You obviously had a lot of contacts from your prior life, but now this new initiative, what did you first do to get new sales?
I've been in operations my whole life, so I've just run operations. So I understand the P&L. I understand that it's absolutely critical that there be a weekly operating system that runs my business. I believe in that wholeheartedly. But the other thing that I've realized is I'm not a great salesperson. I'm not a great recruiter. And so I'm not a great consultant necessarily. So I've got to go out and find and collect and recruit those people. And in so doing, I've got to give up some of the ownership of the business for key hires. And sometimes I look at them and I say, you know, my goodness, I'm giving up all this portion of the business, but then I step back and say, but wait a minute, there's no way you could do that yourself. So better to have some than none, which is really be what the alternative is in terms of looking at key partners that came in and helped build our first business, and then key partners one of which is actually been in both ventures. We have key partners in our second one as well.
Okay, so from a marketing standpoint, in 2013, what was your first initiative, and then how did you build on that?
The first initiative is always a website, and it actually started with the name. If you don't have, the name of your company is not trademarked, which I would highly encourage everybody to spend a few $1,000s to trademark your name and trademark your logo. It goes to creating value when you go to selling your business, because they can be taken away from you very quickly. But we spend a lot of time in terms of having to create a name. Most websites nowadays, you can't just use ordinary English words. So Valintry is actually a derived word. It's a male-oriented logo because of our client base is predominantly male. Our former company was female. Our butterfly was our logo. So we think through the name and making sure that we can also get the URL for the name, as well as trademarking the name as well as the trademark. And so you start from the very beginning in terms of how you're going to market. That website is then taken, and there's so many tools now, very inexpensive tools that you can do in terms of reaching prospective clients through email, through the actual search engine optimization of your website in terms of looking for specific solutions that prospective clients are looking for. And we build out an entire digital marketing campaign almost before we start that identifies what problems do we solve as an organization. And having gone through this and going back to what Bernie taught me in 2001, I mean, if I was starting a community grass mowing business, you can do websites so inexpensively nowadays. I would absolutely start there.
Amen. Amen. So you're number 142 on the Inc. 500. That's an incredible accomplishment in just a few short years. What was the key in your mind that puts you there? Because of course, in the past 12 months, tremendous growth. Share some of that.
I mean, the key, let me tell you the first key, okay? And this is the honest truth. Apply, okay? The first key is to apply. Broadcast what your company does. Whether it's the Orlando Business Journal and the fact that you can submit information from your employees that can make you the best employer, one of the best employers in Orlando, or one of the fastest growing companies in Orlando, start with the local Orlando Business Journal and expand from there. As far as the Inc. 500, number one is apply. There's a process you go through that you have to provide information. If you're a particularly insecure individual that doesn't like to share data, you might not want to do that. But we think the marketing benefit from us sharing quality data, and that quality data is backed up by our relationship with Grennan Fender that we've worked with for years. They not only handled accounting in our former company, they handled the entire transaction, which was about a 4-year process from beginning to end. And so we're able to provide them as backup when we submit to something like Inc. 500. They know that that information is real based on that relationship.
Got it. You'd mentioned just before key people hires, right, and bringing those folks in to help spur the growth. But when we're looking at incentive compensation for the whole organization, especially as it's growing, let's say it doubles in size over the next few years, share with us about the specific criteria that you would put into an incentive comp plan for those key positions.
We believe in benchmarking successful companies. In fact, I would caution you because I told you my first company, we were virtual for a period of time. The acquirer told us that if you want to continue to be a virtual company, we're not going to buy you. Okay, so that was sort of a wake-up call to get into conformance with the rest of the industry. And what's interesting is if you're delivering a service or a product, or you're organized in a way that nobody else is, and you're struggling with your business, there's probably you probably want to change your structure, product, or what have you. And so, sorry, I lost my train of thought on your last question. No, on the incentives.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
We benchmark companies a lot, and the company that acquired us actually operates a small $12 billion private technology consulting company. And so in our relationship of 6 years, we were able to glean a lot of information and benchmark successful things they did to be successful. One of those that we found very interesting was to keep base pay low and commission rates high. Inevitably, we're going to go through ups and downs in this economy, as we all can speak to from personal experience recently. The lower you can keep your base pay and the higher you can keep your incentive compensation, the more you're going to preserve being the lowest cost provider of your services, which is going to allow you to survive the good times and the bad times. And the other thing is it's going to make your workforce much more productive because it's going to be crystal clear as to who's making rewards and who isn't based on those commission plans. So to the degree possible, as much of your workforce as possible to have on that kind of commission plan, I would strongly encourage you to do that.
Excellent, excellent. So we've been talking about valuation. And here, I'm going to try to restate this question here. How important do you feel is performing a thumbnail valuation on your company on a regular basis? And let's just speak to it from a benchmarking perspective. How important is that for you in a growth plan?
The good news, having had the privilege of being trained inside 3 publicly traded companies for 19 years before I started my first company, the thing that I learned is that building a company to become a large company is no different than building a company that's going to be sold. So good practice in terms of written contracts, audited financial statements, which I strongly believe in, all the things that you would expect a well-run large company to do, the more of that you can do within your own small company is going to increase your ultimate sales price. What I never do is I don't sit around and I don't ever think about the exit, if you want to know the truth. I didn't think about the exit with the first company, and I don't think about the exit with my current company. And some of you may really disagree with that because that's not necessarily focusing on the goal. What I really focus on is growth in the day-to-day development and innovation within the company. Looking at that continuous growth, and I'm a big believer that companies are doing one of 2 things. They're either growing or they're dying. There's no status quo, okay? So if anybody that's thinking that, I've got news for you. If you think you're static, you're probably declining. And so the key is how do we look at that continuous growth, continuous improvement, I think Brendan talked about earlier in our meeting today. How do you get that continuous improvement? And if tomorrow's not better than today, then I'm not doing my job.
Got it. Well, I come out of a family business, and family businesses are the foundation of our economic engine. In today's world, it's increasingly difficult to develop compensation plans for the whole organization, let alone when you have family members in the organization. What's your perspective on that?
The only experience I can speak to personally in terms of family members is I have an absolutely wonderful wife I've been married to for 34 years who in both of these enterprises not only supported it, but volunteered as the initial bookkeeper, human resources, and in the first organization actually sold. She actually sold our first contract, which she reminds me of on an ongoing basis. But in both organizations, she's talented enough that she was able to run the fundamental bookkeeping services as well as the accounting. We didn't do that because we had any money to pay her. We did that because that's what we needed to do as owners to get the business up and running. What I'll do is I'll go out and pay for quality market rate talent first. I'll worry about me collecting money later. And that's paid off very handsomely for both of us. And so good news is she's not having to have been involved. I would not encourage you to do it any longer than you possibly have to because it does change dynamics within the company. But if you can at all avoid it, going to other CEO meetings and listening to more detailed conversation, it can lead to a lot of challenges and heartache from what I can observe with other people and family-owned businesses.
Very good, very good. Just take a pause. Are there any questions from our group here that you'd like to ask Daryl before I move on?
Yeah, you mentioned something a little earlier on giving up some ownership in the business in order for key hires at strategic moments in the business?
Yes.
How do you determine what to give them and how to vest them in that ownership?
First of all, if these individuals are taking no risk, okay, meaning that they're not putting any money up, and most importantly, they're joining my organization at market salaries, which my 3 partners in my first organization did, okay, they received not more than 2% ownership in the company. And that doesn't sound like very much, but each of them walked away with well over $1 million in the final transaction. So these small percentages, especially if you relate them to something like a publicly traded company, these can become very big numbers, and you've got to educate them to that. The other thing is all of those came with a 3-year vest, just to make sure that they weren't going to be, joining and leaving. But it was not any more complex than that. And obviously, you need to obviously really know who they are and what their talents are to make that commitment.
Oh, sure. Good. Charlie.
Well, first of all, Daryl, I compliment you on your branding. I've been keeping track of Valintry since you guys started in 2013. I was one of the key founders of a company called Four Corner Resources. I made an exit in 2014 to start Blue Wave now. So I know you guys really well. I've always admired that you have found a way to create a different market value by doing your assessments in addition to your staffing and recruiting model. What percentage do you think is, and maybe this is too deep, but what percentage do you think of revenue is your assessment part, and is most of your business recruiting and staffing, or is it kind of balanced?
It's absolutely approaching balance. We initially, staffing got the wheels going, but we've taken on several actually multi-million-dollar projects, one that's multi-million, but the other ones that are in the hundreds of thousands or as low as 5,000 if there's an initial assessment for a small company. But what we found is by starting with that assessment, it leads into a much broader relationship. We are a values-based company. Every week we say we take the values off the wall. We talk about those values. Each person on the team presents something about one of those values. So the point is once we get in there, we're able to expand our relationship in terms of meeting the needs of that client. So we're very rapidly approaching a 50%.
And then sorry, it's a 2-part question. Have you realized in doing that and adding that to your business model, has it increased your multiples of valuation of your current company now?
Well, one thing you'll learn is valuation is, I think we saw that there were at least 8 different valuation models up here. One of the things you'll discover with any buyer, at least in my experience, is you'll never agree on the valuation, okay? A strategic buyer, I think you have a better chance of connecting with. A private equity buyer, they're the worst because they want to get as much as they can for as little as they can and don't have as much incentive. So I actually look at it as 2 potential different valuations. The valuations on the staffing side would be typically a multiple of 4 to 7 like we heard here. The consulting side would be completely different, and a lot of the consulting projects can actually lead to a software solution, which ends up actually selling for a multiple of revenue, not necessarily a multiple of EBITDA. And so by having the 2, you get diversification, which we're huge believers in. We watched a $700 million business go down in 1999 because of the Medicare changes with the stroke of a pen in Congress. Because of that, we are huge believers in diversification. And so we like the diversification that the 2 bring, as well as the consistency of the staffing offsets the shark fins of the consulting.
Excellent. Cool. Okay, Alvaro, yes.
Talking about the key people that you give them a small share of the company, what happens if in the future people change and you want to get rid of them? How do you do that?
It would be difficult to actually get rid of them, okay? So hopefully they have enough talent, and if you're growing and evolving, inevitably, I've always operated a national company or at least a regional company. So we're accustomed, based on that diversification, to have different business lines. So what they maybe started with may not be where they end up, but there's different pockets within the company where I believe that we can find a match as to the talent they can bring with what the organization needs.
Great.
So it would be difficult, though, to actually terminate, but they are still minority shareholders. So it would just make the ownership a little
Do you give your minority shareholders buy-sell agreements up front with employment contracts?
Yes.
Okay, so that would be your plan if they don't work out, you
Yep.
just exercise rights in that.
Yes, in fact, that's an important point is if they left, they win the lottery. We always use this as an example. They win the lottery and they want to move to the islands, to live the rest of their lives. They would give up that ownership stake in terms of giving that up, and they understand that coming in.
Tom?
So if they do quit, that stock goes away, it's not a first right of refusal.
That's correct.
In other words, you don't have first right of refusal, it automatically
Yep.
is yours.
Yep.
Okay.
Even if they're vested?
Yep.
Yes, Tom?
Yeah, I had questions sort of along the same lines. One, working in publicly traded companies for 19 years is radically different than an organically grown company out of your house for 3 years. Coming from the publicly traded background, is it easier for you to give away a percentage of your company? I mean,
Great question.
Yeah.
I know that for me, I did it once and regretted it and did everything I could to get out of it. It changed everything.
Well, part of what made my transition easiest is the three partners for my first company, I actually went and hand collected from the previous company. So they happened to have lived in Florida. I got in a car and drove to, one was in Jacksonville, one was in Sarasota, one was in the Orlando area. I went and said, I'm going to start this company. Do you want to be part of it? They all had jobs making 6 figures a year. They're very successful. They were the top recognized recruiters. They were award winners in a very large billion-dollar company. And so I went to them, hand-picked them. So I knew what their track record was and knew what they could do. And I knew that there was no chance I had of any chance of me doing what they did. So from that personal experience, having seen what they did, I would say that created a much easier situation for me to give up some of that ownership stake in the company.
Well, I mean, early on, I felt the same way, and then realized I could have done the same thing with just profit sharing.
It's just, you know what, it really, a lot of times
And then I wouldn't have to go to anybody else. If I wanted to do something, it just.
you're free. Yeah, the less encumbrances and the fewer number of partners or stockholders you have, investors do not want to deal with 67 shareholders because you can't keep them all moving in the same direction. So the smaller the number, the better. And it's second only in importance to getting married in terms of you selecting those business partners, in my opinion.
When you have a small partner, like you're talking about, only a couple percentage points each, do they really even have an impact on the management decisions, the buy decisions, what price you would sell for, or do you just overwhelm them with the majority share?
They do because of the way I happen to manage. I manage, one of our values is transparency. So you can go to any of my recruiters and they'll tell you the profitability of our company, going into this year, what it is year to date. Wow. We believe in total transparency. So as far as the transactions, making the decision, could I have just done it, in silence in a back room? Absolutely, but I'm not that smart. I need the collective input of the partners. And the other thing I was able to do is by going with a strategic buyer, okay, these people mean a lot to me. I mean, I have a relationship with them, and maybe that's a mistake to some people, but by going with a strategic buyer, you can create a much better pathway for your employees staying with the company than perhaps a private equity buyer. And our buyer, we were a platform acquisition. So even though they were in a similar business, we were in a platform acquisition, which means they really did leave us alone and remembered what they had promised for at least the first 2 or 3 years. They forgot after the fourth, but compared to what typically happens where large companies blow up their acquisition within the first 12 months, that did not happen with us.
Do you also use the percentage you're using it to recruit, and then is it also, are you using it for performance based?
The percentage of ownership?
Yes. If I understood you, you're actually using it for both. You're using it to recruit somebody new in?
Yeah, it's only done on the
percentage?
startup. I don't, like for example, we would not add shareholders at this point in time. It's only at the startup. But then, K-1s and things like that are distributed because we've operated in 24 states in the 4 years we've been in operation because of the web nature of the work we do. And so, we work with Grennan Fender in terms of the K-1s and the reporting that are required for all of those states. And then we work, as partners to make sure that they have the appropriate tax support to be able to do that.
Yeah, great. So, just in that vein, now you're not a startup. Now you're growing. You may have multiple offices depending upon.
Not fast enough, but we are growing.
I hear you.
Okay.
So you wouldn't give necessarily equity.
No.
Have you used non-equity plans?
We have looked very seriously at non-equity plans. This small $12 billion private company that I mentioned uses a stock appreciation rights plan to an amazing way in scope, in motivation, to the point that the internal employees feel they are stockholders. They're referred to as stockholders, they act like stockholders, they're rewarded like stockholders with annual vacations and events and what have you. We've looked very, very seriously at that with both our law firm and Grennan Fender, and we just can't get comfortable with the liability that it creates down the road for particularly good times and bad times in the business. So we've seen it work incredibly successfully. So that's one area that we've done a lot of research and have just not gotten comfortable enough and figure there's probably a profit sharing plan that's simpler that would not create the same exposure that kind of a plan would.
Great. Have you considered phantom equity?
Well, a stock appreciation rights plan is often called a phantom stock plan. They overlap. So, yep. And so, literally, in this large company, people are introduced in the company as a 7-time stock winner, and they know that they've got 727 shares of stock, and it's all phantom stock.
Right. Excellent. So speak to me about your own employee benefits program and how you've used it as a strategic recruiting tool.
This is gonna, those of you that are in the benefits business will not like this, but we use a professional employment organization and have from the beginning of time. And we probably pay a little bit more for that. But the reason we do is we can be up and running. I can get an order, I can get a deal in any state in the United States of America and have staff on the ground working within 48 hours. I don't have to deal with their workers' compensation plan. I don't have to deal with their unemployment plan. There's also been some interesting benefits because of the nature of our work, whether we actually have an employee working in the state or not, in terms of the definition of nexus. I've had states try to come after me, but by using the PEO, I'm technically not an employee of my company. I'm an employee of the PEO that we use. Was able to get out of that issue because we did not, my Valintry did not have nexus in that state. It doesn't always work that way, but there's a lot of benefits to us in terms of the nature of the way we work and the way we market ourselves on the web in terms of being national. And as I said, we probably pay more for that. But most importantly, from a recruiting standpoint, my benefits are as good at Valintry as they were with any of the 3 publicly traded companies I was with, whether it's Blue Cross Blue Shield, Aetna, United. The plans are all competitive and they're all too expensive, I might add.
Not here. All right, let's. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Are those plans 100% paid by you, or is there an employee percentage there, or does that vary?
They're split. We absolutely believe in employee participation, just because you get.
Split?
Pardon me?
Is it a 50-50 split, or
it's probably it's not quite a 50-50. It's probably we pay about 1/3 of the health benefit, and we are at this point. We're still in startup phase. We have not opted to go to 401k matching. 401k is available, but we've just not have elected to make that decision. We will make that decision, but in light of the fact that we're still using capital to grow, we're not prepared to put that away, and we don't feel like it's been restrictive in terms of our ability to recruit.
All right,
She has had a question.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Two questions. With the PEO relationship you're talking about, have you used the same PEO since the beginning of this phase?
No, we've used 5.
Okay. All right, so, well, that's interesting. And so then my question would be, with the two divisions you're talking about, technology planning as well as the staffing services, I was going to ask before you said the PEO, do the employees of both of those divisions, are they equally, do you sense that they view themselves as similar, or is there some synergy between them as employees? I was going to ask you that before you told me about the PEO. Do you feel that there's a buy-in by the employees, even though you've got a PEO relationship, and are they equally viewed from a company standpoint? Do you think they see themselves as equally valuable?
It's absolutely never been an issue in terms of, we explain it, it's a co-employee relationship. It allows you to get much more competitive benefits than what we could provide as an individual company. And all of these services are, you can get, there's discount programs for car rentals, there's employee, the support plans for if there's a death or what have you. I'm blanking on the name of it. But there's a full gamut of services. So they're getting the same services that they would have had if they were coming from, a large employer elsewhere. So they sign the paperwork and they're hired, and they go through our online hiring process, and away we go. So and then the other thing is what's going on in the rest of the company, because the company never really meets. We're kind of a virtual company. We have people all over the place. So in fact, it's quite rare for us to meet our employees. I mean, all of our entire first company, we probably, in placing 1,000 employees, probably never met more than probably 25 in person. Because all of the hiring, the background checks, everything is done on a virtual basis. And so that's what allows us to do things on an out-of-state basis. And so, if you are somebody working in Billings, Montana, you have no idea that there's technology staff working in Orlando, Florida, other than reading our website and what we do.
So what have you and your leadership team done to minimize financial and operational decisions that cost your company excessive time, money, and effort?
Okay. I'm not being paid for this, but some of the process that I learned in those 20 years with public companies, I read about in a book a couple years ago that I was introduced to, and that's Traction. And so I think it's a fabulous book that encompasses an entire business process. One of the main things that's one of the little parts of Traction is an issues meeting. So if you have a routine issues meeting once a month that employees can raise what issues they're identifying in the company that's preventing the company from moving forward or causing a rub or frustration, that issues meeting does a lot to help management resolve these issues, which is usually some minor thing, but it really gets people worked up. So that continuous feedback. And then the other piece is, we use technology to run the business. I was glad to hear Brendan talk about an electronic data warehouse. Technology is so cheap nowadays. Based on these assessments that we do, small companies can have an EDW that collects the data that they need to run the business on a weekly basis. So you need an operating system. It'll add to the value of your business. But to be able to look at that data as close to real time as possible, at least on a weekly basis, is the other key in terms of being successful. And I will tell you, that was one of the primary reasons the strategic buyer bought us. So even though at that time our revenues were 20-some million in revenue at the time of the acquisition, they did not have the same operating systems that we did, and they were 650 million in revenue. So they bought us to learn from those operating systems that we had in place. And again, a lot of that came from experience from former lives, but there we were in that little company that they paid a lot of money for relative to that operating system.
I have two last questions. One is the importance of the financial institution in your growth plan and how you utilize capital and how the capital and financing providers have helped you in the business.
Okay. Well, your CPA is a partner, and I've mentioned that multiple times in the course of this presentation, and I can't stress that enough. And the relationship we have with Grennan Fender is we run into a specific tax question or issue or how we're going to do something. We just pick up the phone, and generally we get an answer, we're able to get to our person that we work with and get an answer on a very quick basis. The other thing is I cannot watch Shark Tank. I have an issue with private equity groups. No offense if anybody's a private equity company here, but it breaks my heart to see entrepreneurs give their company away or have their company stolen from them. So literally, I cannot watch that show. What I do believe in is a banking relationship, okay? And so as crazy as this sound, when I started my first company, and some of you may remember getting your first credit card, but I would liken it to getting your first credit card. Our first banking line, I actually wrote a check for the bank line itself to underwrite the bank line, a personal check that I underwrote. So by doing that, the bank opened a credit line, started a working relationship with us. We formally present our business and where it is on at least a quarterly basis. The bank always knows where we are, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We're completely open and honest with them. And so by starting that relationship, we were very quickly able to move those lines to well over $1 million in credit lines. When you start to get over $1 million in credit lines, they start to look for those audited financial statements. And I would absolutely pay for an audited financial statement over a review because it just eliminates any negotiation when that acquirer comes along. You're going to be focusing on EBITDA adjustments as opposed to whether your financial statements are accurate. So I personally think that those are in dollars well invested, and you want at least 3 years before you think about an exit in terms of having a trailing 3-year audit list.
Great stuff. Well, I'm going to go back to what Russell had said, because now we have a client where we're trying to fix a lack of planning. All right. Speak to us about how you incorporate the thought of paying taxes into your regular daily, monthly, and annual planning for your business.
It's not a huge consuming factor for us at this point because we're in total control as to what we reinvest in the business. So if our earnings are low because like this year, we invested substantially in 3 significant sales executives. And so are the earnings where I want them to be? No, they're not where are they growing as fast as I would want them to be? No. But I have to step back and say to myself, we've inflicted that pain on ourselves as an effort to grow to the next level. And so we're still at a point from a growing standpoint that we can meter or monitor or measure our tax situation based on the investment we continue to make in the business. And I expect to do that for a long period of time. You may smile at this, but the goal we've put out in front of our organization is to grow to a $100 million business.
All right.
And so we put a big, bodacious goal out in front of the organization. And are we growing there as fast as we want to? No, but we put that out there. And if you ask any of our team members, going back to traction, they know what that long-term goal is, as well as what that short-term goal is over the course of the next year.
All right, so I'm gonna go off script here a little. Last thing. If there was one word that you would use to give our audience here about becoming the best, what is that word for you?
The word is values. The word is absolutely values. And the NovaCare organization was 10,000 clinicians across the United States that were remote, and we were a for-profit company. What linked those two very diverse audiences was a set of written values that were spoken and talked about before every single meeting. And so when we talk to our bank, we point to the wall, we talk about our values. When we talk to a client, we talk to them about the fact that we're a values-based business and to please hold us accountable to our values in terms of the way we're going to treat you in terms of honesty and integrity. And honesty and integrity is the currency of good business in terms of, that's my belief.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank you for all this time. You had some great points, great pearls of wisdom, and I look to have you back here at the CEO Leadership Forum.
All right, very good.
Thank you.
Thank you all.